Hi, it's Phoenix, and I would like to talk about what could be called the philosophy of intelligence. Um, and this is going to be the first part of a two-part set on this idea or concept of the philosophy of intelligence. I'd like to start off by saying that I'd like to challenge a claim that's often made about what true intelligence is, and that is the kind of stereotypical image or idea that we have of intelligence. Einsteinian intelligence, for example, uh, intelligence is usually defined as having a high IQ. So we think of people like Noam Chomsky, Goethe, William Shakespeare, and to go back to Albert Einstein, that's how we define intelligence. And in my opinion, I think intelligence is something much more, something deeper. Um, I would like to start off by saying that I think that there is a huge link between innocence and intelligence. And essentially, I think that innocence is often not seen as intelligence. And I disagree. I think innocence can be intelligence. I think, ironically, naivety can be intelligence. So, for instance, I'm friends um, with this family, and they have a child. He's a boy, and he's about 3 years old. And it's very interesting because he has this stream of consciousness way of going about things, very stream of consciousness way. And I define that as intelligence because it's just very fluid, you know, um, and most people would say that this stream of consciousness way of going about things, stringing together language, this creative way of using language is not intelligence because he's not out winning the Nobel Peace Prize. He's not out solving world hunger or curing cancer. And yet, while I think all of those are super important and I think that they're necessary, I think that what's interesting about this kid is that it definitely shows that he does indeed have intelligence and he has the potential to do great things uh, through kind of his personality and the way that he does things. And so I think that there's a strong relationship between innocence and intelligence that hasn't been explored and that I think should be explored. Um, and in terms of the naivety, there will be times where this kid will mimic or repeat what someone has said, and you can tell that in the tone of his voice that he's saying it because he's trying to learn that specific word. And that to me is extreme intelligence. And it wouldn't necessarily be seen that way because it would be seen as naivety generally by someone who has a really high IQ. Not a stereotype, but some probably would do that. But I see that as very, very intense intelligence. And so there's another thing I'd like to talk about, another link that I think exists, and that is a link between mental illness and intelligence. And so I'm currently reading these two books, a book called House Rules by Jodi Picoult, and a book called Anti-Oedipus Capitalism and Schizophrenia by Deleuze and Guattari. And essentially, they depict two illnesses, schizophrenia and autism. And in the book by Deleuze, it basically talks about schizophrenia and how they're very intelligent people, schizophrenics, because of their ability to free associate. And that ability to free associate is what allows for novel perception, allows for creativity, and allows for them to break away from the pack of the masses, so to speak, and to think for themselves. Some of that's due to the fact that they're isolated and seen as pariahs because of their illness, which in my opinion is not an illness but a gift. But regardless of that, Deleuze's main claim is that this ability to free associate, to think of one thought after another, even if there's no relationship, is actually intense intelligence, and I am inclined to agree. The rhizome is a metaphor that is used throughout Deleuze's work to be able to kind of encompass this idea, and the rhizome is basically, so you could look at it as this. You could have one word, and you have this word lead to connotations to all of these other words. And essentially that's how the rhizome works. how free association works, where one word leads to a whole bunch of other associations. And that's what free association is, and that's how schizophrenics can think in certain circumstances. And again, it's actually a form of intelligence. Now, as far as House Rules by Jodi Picoult, which portrays autism, it seems very accurate based off my limited understanding of autism. Essentially, Jacob, who is the autistic kid, he's 18 years old, he has this ability to understand forensic science very well. And he's very, very smart with that, but he's not necessarily good at reading verbal cues. He's not good at reading body language. He's not necessarily good at making friends. He's not good at social interactions. And what this has led to me to think about is the concept of positive intelligence and negative intelligence. So positive intelligence would, as an example, be the idea where you can sit down at a desk and write a report on something, write a journalistic piece, write a novel, write something. It's the ability to go out and maybe win the Nobel Peace Prize and problem solve and come up with solutions and ways of combating certain problems in the world. And I see that as positive intelligence. But in my opinion, I think intelligence also tends to be coupled with this kind of negative intelligence. So, for instance, it would be like a schizophrenic being unable to control their thoughts, so all of their thoughts racing. That would be negative intelligence, or in the case of autism, the inability to read social cues. And I actually see that as a form of intelligence. So when I say negative intelligence, which is what that would be, I'm not saying that it is a negative thing in the traditional way that we use negative, that specific word. But it's just negative as a way of kind of understanding the two binaries. But it is, in my opinion, these inability to read verbal cues and all of this, a kind of intelligence, and I think that hasn't been taken into account, that this positive intelligence and this negative intelligence actually balance each other out. In my opinion, it makes a person more whole and more well-rounded, and it makes their intelligence more well-rounded as a result. And I think that that's super important. And I think that that's why people with autism or people with schizophrenia or people with bipolar or any kind of illness, mental illness, tend to be very, very smart. And it's because they have this well-rounded ability of this negative intelligence and this positive intelligence. And things that we see as bad, such as the inability to read verbal cues, such as racing thoughts, are actually good. And I would call it positive intelligence, but for the sake of navigating through these ideas, I just refer to it as negative intelligence. But again, it's not necessarily negative. So there's another concept I'd like to talk about too when it comes to intelligence, and that is the idea of this kind of ability to think with your heart and to think on your feet, to think quickly. And when you look up intelligence in the dictionary, it basically says the ability to navigate through new situations, novel situations, and to be able to make your way. And so I have 3 quick examples of intelligence in literature. And the first example is from a book called Lean on Pete by Willie Vlautin. And basically what happens is there's this character named Charlie who really, really loves this horse named Pete. And he takes care of the horse, looks after the horse. And there comes a point in the narrative where the horse is eventually going to be killed because he doesn't run as fast as he used to, and he's basically a useless racehorse now. And so essentially what Charlie does is he runs away with the horse in order to take him to his freedom. And I see that as true intelligence. Not that, being able to understand complex math equations is not intelligence, because it is. But I think that, by saying true intelligence, I'm describing how, there's certain intelligences that seem more genuine and authentic, and less calculated as an example, by using the example of the math equations. Not that that isn't useful, and not that that isn't intelligence, but by true intelligence, I'm just using that in the sense that it's intelligence that is deeper in a sense, and it's not just being able to, quote lines from Shakespeare. It's something a lot more fundamental. And so to get back to Lean on Pete, essentially what he does is he runs away And I see this as important because he's thinking with his heart and he's willing to sacrifice himself. And Charlie is willing to interpret the welfare of others. And I think that that's super important to keep in mind. Another example would be from John Hart's The Last Child. And in it, there's a character named Johnny Merriman. And there's a lot that happens, but suffice to say, he decides to go on countless adventures, dangerous adventures, to find his lost sister. And it puts him in many dangerous situations. But while most people would decry that and say that that is not intelligence because he's being reckless and dangerous, I actually see that that is true intelligence, again to use my phrase, because he's willing to sacrifice, he's willing to look out and seek out the benefit of others. I hesitate to use the word emotional intelligence, but in a way that's what it is. Because he's just very emotionally involved and he's willing to make certain sacrifices, no matter what that means. And he does it through a kind of naivety. And last but not least, there's one of my favorite books, a book called Boy by James Hanley. And in it, there's a character named Arthur Fearon who runs away on a ship in order to find a better life for himself. And he wants to find a better life for himself, and so that's what he does by running away on the ship. But while he's on the ship, he almost dies. And most people that are reading it would probably see that as stupidity. Why would he almost get himself killed just to be able to, chase his dreams or whatever? Essentially, he was being irrational. And in fact, I see that as very rational. And if you read the book, you could probably see what I mean. But essentially, what he's doing is being very intelligent by sticking true to himself, by staying true to himself, and by doing what he can to accomplish his goals. And by looking at things not how people expect him to see it, but how he wants to be able to see things. And I think that takes a lot of courage and a lot of guts. So essentially what I'm describing as intelligence are things that, are a lot more complicated than just our stereotypical notion of intelligence as something that, is just measured by a high IQ. Einsteinian intelligence, to use my example. And I think that that is exactly what I'm challenging. And I think that it's unfair to say that that's all that intelligence is. So, last but not least, I guess all I can really say is that how I perceive intelligence is just the ability to interpret the welfare of others, and to think about this negative and positive intelligence and how they basically complete each other. Kind of like yin and yang, though, as the philosophical theory in Eastern philosophy goes, is they complete each other and they exist in harmony. And I think that that's, in the case of the autistic people and in the case of the schizophrenic people and the like, they complete each other. And I think that they're important to the process. And so anyway, that's about all I have. And I look forward to seeing you in part 2 of this little talk on the philosophy of intelligence. And again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.